She sat alone at that table while the entire restaurant watched him walk away. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she existed in a body he decided wasn't worth his time. Victoria Bennett had built a company from nothing, had rooms full of people who needed her decisions to survive, and still she sat there, hands folded in her lap, trying not to let her face break in front of strangers. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Then a man from across the room pushed back his chair, picked up his drink, and walked toward her. Not because he knew who she was, but because he'd seen enough. If you've ever been judged before someone even learned your name, stay with this story until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The rain had been coming down since 4 in the afternoon, that thin Pacific Northwest drizzle that doesn't look like much from a window, but soaks through a jacket inside of 2 minutes. Ryan Carter had been standing in it for most of the day. He'd spent 8 hours on the Morrison Bridge overpass project, a city contract that paid decent but demanded everything. And by the time he pulled into the parking lot of Ellie's after-school program, his boots were heavy with water, and his lower back had started doing that thing it did when he'd pushed too hard without stretching. Ellie was waiting just inside the door, her backpack on, her jacket half-zipped, holding a piece of construction paper that she presented to him with both hands the moment he walked in. "It's you," she announced. Ryan looked at the drawing, a stick figure in a yellow hard hat standing next to a very tall bridge. The bridge had a face on it for reasons he couldn't quite explain. "Why does the bridge have a face?" "Because you talk to it," Ellie said simply, as if this were obvious. "I heard you on the phone telling Marcus you were going to figure out the bridge's problem." Yeah, okay, that's not quite what that means, but I love it." He crouched down so she could climb onto his back for the walk to the truck. At 8 years old, she still asked for this sometimes, on days when she was tired or when the rain was doing something dramatic, and Ryan had learned a long time ago not to make a big deal of it when she did. She'd stop asking one day. Until then, he'd carry her. They drove home through wet streets with the radio on low, Ellie narrating a disagreement she'd had with a girl in her class named Priya over the correct way to build a birdhouse in art class. Ryan listened, asked the right questions, kept his eyes on the road. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Southeast Morrison. 2 bedrooms, windows that let in a decent amount of morning light, a kitchen where the cabinet above the stove had a broken hinge Ryan had been meaning to fix for 6 months. It was a good apartment. It was home. He made pasta that night because it was fast, and because Ellie would eat it without negotiation. While the water boiled, he checked his phone. A message from Marcus Teal, his site foreman, about a materials delay on Monday, and a reminder from the school about a parent meeting the following Thursday. He answered Marcus and made a note about the school, and then put the phone face down on the counter. It was his friend Dominic who texted at 7:15. "You need to eat somewhere that isn't your own kitchen. Come to Tavola. Bring nothing. Leave the kid with your neighbor." Ryan stared at the message. Mrs. Okafor next door had offered twice that month to watch Ellie when she saw Ryan come home looking destroyed. He'd turned her down both times out of what he now recognized was stubborn pride. "Ellie's already eaten," he typed back. "Then she can eat again, or she can sit there. I don't care. You need to be around adult human beings for 2 hours. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. I'm a doctor of social wellness. Come." Dominic Reyes had been Ryan's closest friend since they were 18 and working summers on a landscaping crew outside of Eugene. He was now a structural engineer at a firm downtown, which Ryan thought was funny given where they'd both started. Dominic had a way of being correct about things that Ryan didn't want to admit he needed, and Ryan had learned over the years that fighting it usually costs more energy than just going. He asked Mrs. Okafor. She said yes before he'd finished the sentence and opened her door wide to let Ellie through with a smile that made Ryan feel something in his chest he couldn't name. Tavola was the kind of restaurant that wasn't trying to impress anyone, which was exactly why it worked. It had exposed brick walls and pendant lights that cast everything in warm amber, small tables pushed close together the way Italian places always seem to do, a chalkboard menu near the bar. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't theatrical either. Dominic had a table near the back when Ryan arrived, already working through a glass of red wine and looking very pleased with himself. "You look like a wet dog," Dominic said. "I just walked 2 blocks in the rain." You always look like a wet dog a little bit, even when it's dry. He gestured at the chair across from him. Sit. I already ordered the bread. Ryan sat. He took off his jacket and hung it on the chair back and looked at the menu even though Dominic would order for both of them anyway. He always did, and Ryan had long since stopped finding it annoying. It meant he didn't have to make a decision about one more thing, which on most evenings was a genuine relief. The restaurant was about 3/4 full. A birthday dinner at a long table near the window, a couple in their 60s eating in comfortable silence, two women leaning in over their food talking fast. Normal Friday evening. Ryan let some of the day's tension out through his shoulders and reached for the bread when it arrived. How's the bridge? Dominic asked. Complicated. We've got a materials issue on the deck reinforcement that might push us 2 weeks. Marcus is working on a vendor alternative, but the specs are tight. That's your fault for taking a city contract. That's my fault for needing money to pay rent. Dominic laughed. They talked about the project for a while, about the city's habit of writing contracts with impossible tolerances and then being shocked when contractors had to improvise, about a mutual friend named Cal who had reportedly quit his job and moved to a boat in Astoria, which Dominic thought was insane and Ryan thought sounded quietly appealing. It was around 8 o'clock when Ryan noticed the couple at the table to his left. Not a couple, he realized immediately. A first meeting. Possibly a blind date. He could tell from the body language. Two people who didn't know each other's rhythms yet. The slight stiffness of it, the way they were both sitting a little too straight. The woman had arrived first. She was in her early 30s maybe, dark hair pulled back, wearing a dark green blouse that looked deliberate without being overdressed. She had a glass of water in front of her, and she'd been looking at the door for a few minutes before the man came in. The man was tall, late 30s, good haircut, the kind of easy confidence that sometimes came from actual substance and sometimes came from a lifetime of being good-looking and never having that tested. He came in shaking rain from his jacket. He found her table, looked at her, and Ryan watched something happen in his face. A calculation, quick and almost involuntary, the kind that people try to hide and rarely do. The man sat down. He said something. Ryan was too far away to hear what exactly, but he saw the woman's expression change. It didn't crumple. It went still instead, which was worse. The man said something else, shorter this time. Then he stood up. He was leaving. He'd been at the table for less than 90 seconds. He picked up the jacket he'd just draped over his chair, said one more thing that made the woman look down at the table, and walked out. The door swung shut behind him. Hey, Dominic said. You still with me? Did you see that? Ryan asked. Dominic turned. The woman was sitting alone now. She had both hands flat on the table, fingers pressed against the cloth like she was steadying herself, and she was not looking at anything. Around her, the restaurant had gone slightly quiet in that way rooms do when something uncomfortable happens and everyone is pretending they didn't see it. Yeah, Dominic said, turning back. That was rough. What did he say to her? I don't know. He said something about how she looked. Ryan didn't know why he was certain about this. He just was. The man had looked at her, decided something in 3 seconds, and then said it out loud instead of keeping it to himself, which meant he'd wanted her to hear it. He barely sat down. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then, Ryan, I'm not doing anything. You have the face. I don't have a face. You absolutely have a face. You've had it since you were 19 and you saw those guys throwing bottles at that dog behind the warehouse and that was completely different. Walked over there and got your nose broken. I'm just going to see if she's okay. Ryan was already pushing back his chair. You don't know her. I know she just got humiliated in front of a restaurant full of people and nobody said anything. He stood up. Eat your bread. He took his drink with him because standing over her without something in his hand felt strange, like he was looming, and he stopped a few feet from her table rather than just walking straight up to it. Up close, he could see that she was holding herself carefully, the way people do when they're working very hard not to let their expression go. Her eyes were dry. Whatever she was feeling, she'd shoved it somewhere internal and locked the door, but the effort of it was visible in the set of her jaw. Hey, Ryan said. Sorry to bother you. She looked up. Her eyes were dark brown, sharp, and not particularly welcoming. which he respected. A stranger walking up to her right now didn't owe her anything, and she had no reason to trust the approach. "The chair's still open," Ryan said. "I just wanted to ask, and you can absolutely tell me to get lost, if you'd rather not sit alone right now." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the chair, then back at him. "You saw that," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I did. I'm sorry." Something in her expression moved. "I'm fine." "You don't have to be fine. I'm just offering the chair." He shrugged. "I'm over there with my friend Dominic, who is currently pretending to look at his menu so hard that you'd think he was studying for an exam. You're welcome to come join us. Or I can just sit here and we can eat in parallel silence like strangers on a train, or you can tell me to go away. Any of those works." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that might have been one if the circumstances were different. "Strangers on a train," she said. "Italian food edition." She exhaled, not quite a laugh, but close. She looked at the empty chair again, and then back at Ryan, and he saw her make a decision. "Okay," she said. "Sit down. But I'm warning you, I'm terrible company right now." "Good thing I have low standards." He pulled out the chair and sat. Ryan Carter, Victoria Bennett. They shook hands across the table in the slightly formal way of people who aren't sure what register to pitch this at, and then the waiter appeared, and the evening shifted into something neither of them had expected to be having. Well, Ryan didn't ask about the man who'd left. He figured she'd either say something or she wouldn't, and either way it wasn't the point. He asked her instead if she'd been to Tavola before, and when she said no, he told her about the carbonara, which was the most honest thing on the menu, and about the fact that the bread came from a bakery 2 blocks away that opened at 5 in the morning and smelled like something that should be illegal. Victoria had wine. Ryan ordered a second beer. Dominic sent over a text. "I am a genius, and also you owe me," which Ryan pocketed without responding to. She was different than he'd expected, though he couldn't have said what he'd expected exactly. She was direct. She had a way of asking questions that was genuinely curious rather than performative, the kind of listening where you could feel the other person actually tracking what you were saying rather than just waiting for their turn. She laughed at things that were funny without overselling it. She pushed back when she disagreed with him, which happened twice in the first 20 minutes. Once about the best way to navigate the 4:05 during rush hour, and once about whether the rain in Portland was worse in November or February, a debate Ryan had strong feelings about. "November is objectively grimmer," he said. "February, you know it's almost done. November, you're just arriving. February is relentless. November still has some color left. November tricked you. It's doing the thing where it's temporarily decent, and then it destroys you." She pointed at him with her fork. "That's not a meteorological argument. That's a feelings argument. Weather is feelings. Weather is precipitation and temperature data. You're wrong, but I respect the conviction." She laughed at that. A real one this time, the kind that showed up in her eyes, and Ryan felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in a while. Not anything dramatic, just the particular ease of talking to someone who was genuinely there. He told her he worked construction. He mentioned Ellie without preamble, the way he'd learned to do it, just dropping it in naturally, not making it a disclosure or a warning, because it wasn't either of those things. "My daughter's 8, he said. "She drew me a picture today of me talking to a bridge. She thinks I have a personal relationship with the infrastructure." Victoria didn't react the way some people did, with that tiny recalibration he'd learned to spot, the subtle inventory update. She just said, "Does the bridge have strong feelings about you as well?" She drew a face on it, so apparently yes. A happy face? A face. Ambiguous expression. The bridge's emotional state is unclear. Victoria pressed her lips together against a smile. "That's actually kind of ominous." They talked about Portland. Ryan had grown up in a suburb of Eugene and moved up after a job offer, which had turned into staying because the city got into you if you weren't careful. Victoria had grown up in Seattle, which Ryan said explained the confidence, and she told him that was the most passive-aggressive compliment she'd ever received, and he said that was fair. At some point, Dominic wandered over under the pretense of borrowing Ryan's phone charger, an obvious lie since they both knew Ryan's was in his jacket pocket, introduced himself with maximum charm, decided Victoria was excellent, told Ryan so in front of her as if she wasn't there, and retreated back to his table with visible satisfaction. "I like him," Victoria said. "He knows. That's the problem." "How long have you been friends?" "Since we were 18 and working the worst landscaping job in Oregon." Ryan leaned back. "We dug drainage ditches for 2 summers. It was miserable, the kind of miserable that either ends a friendship or makes it permanent. We became permanent. That's a good way to find out who someone is." "Shared suffering." He nodded. "Nothing better." She was quiet for a moment, turning her wine glass by the stem. The restaurant had filled up a little more around them, the noise level rising to that comfortable dinner crowd hum that made conversations feel private even in public. "He told me I was heavier than he expected," Victoria said. "The man who left. That's what he said. Basically that he wasn't interested because of that." Ryan didn't say anything for a second. He let it land where it was. "That's a garbage thing to say to someone. It's a garbage thing to think." "Yeah, that too." I don't know why I'm telling you this." She frowned slightly, like she was annoyed at herself for bringing it up. "I've heard worse. I know how to handle it." "Handling it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt." She looked at him. There was something carefully guarded in her expression, like she was deciding whether to let that land or deflect it. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't." Ryan didn't push it further. He refilled her water glass from the carafe on the table because it was there, and her glass was low. And then the food arrived, and the conversation moved into other territory. Her take on the city's changing neighborhoods, which she had opinions about, a documentary about deep-sea creatures that Ellie had been obsessed with for 3 weeks, the philosophical question of whether carbonara was actually a breakfast food eaten at the wrong time of day. By 10 o'clock, the restaurant was thinning out. Ryan had been here for 3 hours and was aware that he needed to get back to Mrs. Okafor and Ellie, but he was also aware that he hadn't talked to anyone like this he genuinely couldn't calculate how long. Not in a way that made him feel like a person instead of just a function. "I should probably go," Victoria said. She started reaching for the check. Ryan moved for it first. "I've got it." "You don't have to." "I know. I want to." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between suspicious and touched, which he thought probably said something about the kinds of people she'd been around. He paid. They walked out together into the rain, which had softened to mist. On the sidewalk outside, Victoria turned up the collar of her jacket and looked at him with that particular look people have when a night has gone somewhere unexpected and they're still figuring out what to do with it. "Thank you," she said, "for, the chair." The chair was available. "Still," she paused. "You didn't have to do that." "My daughter tells me the bridges have feelings," Ryan said. "I figure it costs nothing to act like people do too." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a genuinely good line." "Don't tell Dominic. He'll claim he coached me." She laughed. The mist caught in her hair. She was going to turn and walk away. He could feel it, and he made a decision that surprised him slightly, even as he made it. "I'd like to take you on an actual date," he said. "Not whatever tonight was, which I'm counting as a win regardless, but a real one. Next weekend, if you want." She looked at him. He held still under the look, which required mild effort. "You don't know much about me," she said. "I know you're right about November and wrong about February, and you have opinions about carbonara, and you didn't fall apart when someone tried to make you feel small tonight, and you told a stranger the true thing instead of the easy thing." He shrugged. "That's more than I know about most people I've met." Something shifted in her face. The guarded thing came down a notch. "Saturday," she said. "I'm free Saturday afternoon. I'll find somewhere without ambiguous bridges. Text me." She held out her phone. He typed his number in. She called it once so he'd have hers, and then she tucked the phone away and walked toward the parking structure at the end of the block. And Ryan stood on the sidewalk in the Portland mist watching her go and trying to figure out exactly what had just happened. His phone buzzed. "Dominic." "I knew it. You owe me a steak." Ryan put his phone in his pocket and walked back to his truck. Ellie was asleep on Mrs. Okafor's couch when he came in, one arm hanging off the cushion, her shoes neatly placed beside the coffee table. Mrs. Okafor was in her armchair with a book, and she looked up over her reading glasses when Ryan appeared in the doorway. "She fell asleep at 8:30, she said. "We watched a cooking show. She has very strong opinions about risotto for someone who has never eaten risotto." "She gets that from me." Ryan crossed to the couch and picked Ellie up carefully, and she stirred slightly, mumbled something, and settled back under. He shifted her weight against his shoulder. "You look better," Mrs. Okafor observed. "You went out looking like you needed a week's sleep. You came back looking like a person." "I met someone." She lowered her book. "Oh?" "It's nothing yet. I don't know what it is." He paused, adjusting his hold on Ellie. "She's interesting." "Interesting is better than impressive," Mrs. Okafor said. "Impressive fades. Interesting keeps going." Ryan looked at her. "That's smart. I've been married twice and divorced once. I have things to say." She waved him toward the door. "Go put that child in her bed. Good night, Ryan." "Good night, thank you." He carried Ellie down the hall and through their apartment door and into her room, which was covered wall to wall with drawings she'd made and pinned up herself. Animals, buildings, abstract shapes she called feelings, pictures. He pulled back the covers and settled her in, and she curled immediately toward the pillow, already somewhere deep in sleep. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the way he did most nights, just looking. 8 years. Her whole life, and then some. Raising her alone hadn't been his plan. Nothing about the last 8 years had been his plan. But standing here looking at this kid who drew emotional faces on bridges and had opinions about risotto and rode on his back through rain, he couldn't construct a version of his life that felt better than this one. Different, maybe. Easier in some ways, but not better. He pulled her door halfway closed and went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water and looked at his phone. Victoria Bennett. He had the number. He set a reminder for Saturday morning, looked at it, and put the phone face down. Outside the window, the rain had finally stopped. The street below was wet and quiet, and the streetlights made orange reflections in the puddles. And Ryan stood there for a minute in the dark of his kitchen, just letting the evening settle. Something had started tonight. He didn't know what exactly, but he'd been doing this long enough. This job, this city, this life, to recognize the feeling of a foundation being poured, slow and quiet, in the dark, where nobody could see it yet. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Check. Saturday came with a break in the weather, which Ryan took as neutral information rather than a sign of anything. He'd spent the week working and managing the materials delay on the bridge project and making Ellie's lunches and doing the laundry and not thinking about Victoria Bennett more than occasionally, which he counted as healthy. He'd texted her Wednesday, kept it short, confirmed Saturday, asked what part of the city she was in so he could pick a location that made sense. She'd texted back quickly, southeast near Ladd's Addition. He'd suggested a place he liked in that neighborhood, a small restaurant that did Lebanese food well and wasn't loud enough to make conversation impossible. She'd said yes. He told Ellie he was going out Saturday afternoon, that Dominic was coming to hang out with her, which Ellie accepted without interrogation. She'd moved on to asking whether Dominic could be convinced to build her a fort, which Ryan said was between her and Dominic. He took a shower. He found a shirt that wasn't a work shirt. He told Dominic, who arrived at 1:30, that he was not to say anything encouraging in front of Ellie. "What does she know?" Dominic asked. "That I'm going out." "Does she know it's a date?" "She's 8. 8-year-olds have radar, Ryan. She knows." "I'm leaving now." "You look good," Dominic called after him. Genuinely. Very human. Victoria was already there when he arrived, which he'd somehow expected. She had the quality of a person who arrived places slightly early and thought nothing of it. She was at a small table near the window, no jacket this time, wearing something dark and simple that she wore without apparent awareness of it, which Ryan had noticed the first night too. She dressed like someone who'd made her peace with how she looked a long time ago and moved on to other things. "You found it," she said. "I picked it. I'd be embarrassed if I couldn't find it." She smiled. "Fair point." They ordered. The food came: hummus, lamb flatbread, something with roasted eggplant that Victoria took a bite of, and then ate half of in silence with an expression of genuine concentration. Ryan watched this with entertainment. "Good?" he asked. "Don't talk to me for a second." She took another bite. "Okay. Yes, that's genuinely, The best thing I've had all week. High praise given that it's been 5 days. Brutal week, she said. She said it without elaborating, and Ryan didn't push it. Some things people unpack when they're ready, and some things they don't. What he noticed over the course of the next 2 hours was that she was exactly the same as she'd been at Tavola. There was no performance, no version for a date. She argued with him about things she had opinions on. She was funny in a dry way that snuck up on him. She ate with actual interest rather than the theatrical restraint he'd occasionally encountered from people who were worried about being judged at a table. He told her more about the bridge project. She asked questions that were specific, about load distribution, about the tolerances involved, and he found himself explaining things he didn't usually bother explaining because most people's eyes went polite blank after 30 seconds of construction detail. "How do you know about load distribution?" he asked. "I don't, but I'm a fast learner." She refilled her water glass. "Tell me more about the deck reinforcement problem," he told her. She listened. He had the persistent, unsettling feeling of being paid attention to, which he'd apparently gotten out of the habit of. He learned that she'd grown up in a Seattle suburb with parents who had opposite ideas about what she should be doing with her life, that she'd studied computer science at UW and then spent 3 years at a startup that imploded spectacularly, and that the implosion had somehow clarified things for her rather than breaking them. "You built something after that?" he asked. "I had nothing to lose after that." She said it plainly, without drama. When the worst thing has already happened and you're still there, the fear is different. It's still there, but it's different. Ryan turned that over for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "That's right." She looked at him. He told her about Ellie's mother the previous Friday without much detail, a short relationship that had ended badly before Ellie was born, sole custody since she was 6 weeks old, and he thought she was filing this alongside that. He didn't volunteer more. She didn't ask for more, which felt exactly correct. By the time they were finishing coffee, she drank hers black, he'd noticed. He took his with 1 sugar and no milk, she'd noticed. The afternoon had extended well past what he'd planned for, and he had the distinct and slightly unfamiliar feeling of not wanting it to end. "I should get back," he finally said. "I left my daughter with Dominic, and there's a significant chance they've disassembled something." "You trust him with her?" "He's good with her. He's been around since she was small." He paused. "She'd probably like you." He hadn't planned to say that. It came out with the straightforwardness of something true rather than something calculated, and he watched Victoria take it in. "Is that a thing you say?" she asked. "I don't usually say it, no." She held his gaze for a moment. Something careful in her expression. Something that wasn't quite closed but wasn't fully open either. A door held slightly ajar. "Then I'll take it seriously," she said. They split the check this time over mild protest from him and firm insistence from her, and walked out into the afternoon light, which had held all day. At her car, a dark blue sedan, practical, newer but not flashy, she turned to face him. "I'd like to do this again," she said. "Good." He smiled. "Because I would too." She drove away, and Ryan stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon light, hands in his pockets, and took one even breath. Then he walked to his truck and drove home, where he found Dominic and Ellie in the living room with every couch cushion stacked into a structure that Ellie explained was a mountain with living quarters, and Dominic explaining that it was architecturally sound. Ryan stood in the doorway and looked at the wreckage of his living room and felt, with a quiet and specific clarity, like something had finally shifted in the right direction. He had no idea what was coming. He had no way of knowing how much the world would want to weigh in on what he was starting with this woman. But standing there in his apartment with his daughter explaining the load-bearing principles of a couch cushion mountain, he thought that whatever came next, he'd built harder things than this. He took off his jacket and sat down on the floor and let Ellie explain the architecture. Outside, the clouds were already moving back in over Portland. But the afternoon had been good. Sometimes that was enough. 3 weeks after the Lebanese restaurant, Ryan had taken Victoria to a food cart pod in northeast Portland on a Tuesday evening because she'd mentioned offhand that she'd never been to one, which he'd found genuinely difficult to believe until she explained that she'd spent the last 4 years mostly eating at places where other people made the reservation. They'd eaten Thai food standing up at a picnic table with paper napkins and plastic forks, and Victoria had gotten sauce on her sleeve and sworn about it, and then laughed at herself. And Ryan had thought, there it is. There's the person underneath the composure. That was how it went, those first weeks. Small revelations that accumulated into something he couldn't look away from. She texted in full sentences, which he found funny. Everyone he knew used fragments and autocomplete, but Victoria's messages read like she'd actually considered them. Not formal, just deliberate. He started writing back the same way without thinking about it, and one evening Dominic looked over his shoulder at his phone and said, "Who are you texting in complete paragraphs?" And Ryan told him to mind his business. They saw each other twice that first week after the Lebanese place, then twice the following week, and somewhere in there the logistics of it shifted from coordinated plans to something more organic. She'd call on her way home from work just to talk, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for an hour, and Ryan would be driving back from a site, or making dinner, or helping Ellie with homework while balancing the phone between his ear and shoulder. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the gradual integration of another person's presence into the daily noise of a life. He told Ellie he was seeing someone. He did it carefully, sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning while she was eating cereal, not making it larger than it was. "Her name is Victoria," he said. "We've been spending some time together. I wanted you to know." Ellie turned her spoon in her bowl. "What does she do?" "She runs a company." "What kind?" "Tech, software stuff." Ellie considered this with the focused seriousness she brought to most things. "Does she like bridges?" "She's learning to." "Okay." Ellie went back to her cereal. Then, "Is she nice?" "Yeah, she is." "Good." She said it with the finality of someone closing a meeting agenda item, and that was the whole conversation, which Ryan thought was one of the better parenting outcomes he'd had in recent memory. He didn't push the introduction. He'd learned from nothing in particular except general awareness that introducing Ellie to someone who then disappeared was a specific kind of damage he didn't want to risk. So he kept the two parts of his life adjacent but separate for a while, and Victoria never pushed either, which told him something about her instincts. What she did do, unprompted, was ask about Ellie. Not performatively. She didn't ask the way people sometimes do when they're trying to demonstrate that they're fine with the kid situation. She asked because she was curious. She asked what Ellie was reading, whether she was more interested in drawing or building things, what she thought about school. Ryan answered honestly, which meant acknowledging that Ellie was sharp in ways that sometimes outpaced what the school was offering, and that she had a stubborn streak that came directly from him, and that she still sometimes had nights where she asked questions about her mother that Ryan didn't know how to answer completely. "What do you tell her?" Victoria asked. They were on the phone, late on a Thursday, Ryan sitting on his small balcony with a beer while the city made its usual sounds below. "The true parts," he said, "that her mom was young and scared and made choices she thought were right at the time, that it wasn't about Ellie, that some people aren't ready for things even when they want to be." "Do you believe all of that?" Ryan was quiet for a second. "Most of it. The part about it not being about Ellie. That one I believe completely. The rest I've made my peace with." Victoria didn't respond right away. He could hear her somewhere in what he imagined was a quiet apartment, and he was aware that they'd been talking for almost an hour, and neither of them had suggested ending the call. "You're a good father," she said. Not as a compliment exactly. More like an observation she was committing to record. "I'm a father who's doing the best he can with what he knows," Ryan said. "That's what most of us are." "That's all anyone is," she said, and the way she said it suggested she'd thought about this in context beyond just parenting. He didn't ask, but he filed it. But it was into the 5th week when he found out. Dominic told him. Of course it was Dominic. They were at a bar near the Hawthorne Bridge on a Wednesday evening. Ryan had been working late on a revised schedule with Marcus and needed something that wasn't a construction trailer, and Dominic had appeared with the reliability of a person who monitored these things. And Dominic put his phone down on the bar with the screen facing up and said, "So, Victoria Bennett." Ryan looked at the phone. It was a news article. The headline, "Nexus Solutions CEO. Victoria Bennett leads Pacific Northwest tech expansion." He picked up the phone, scanned the article. Victoria Bennett, 30, founder and CEO of Nexus Solutions, a Portland-based enterprise software company with an estimated valuation north of $400 million. Named to Forbes' 30 Under 30 list 3 years running. Known for an aggressive but ethical business approach and for turning down multiple acquisition offers from larger firms. Ryan put the phone back down. "She didn't tell you," Dominic said. "No. How long have you been seeing her?" 5 weeks. Dominic picked up his beer, set it down, picked it up again. "Okay." "Okay, what?" "I'm just processing." "There's nothing to process." "Ryan, she's worth $400 million. I know what I am." "I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying it like, does she know what you are? Or does she think she's dating someone who, she knows I work construction. She knows I live on Southeast Morrison. She's been to the apartment. A brief visit 2 weeks prior to pick him up before they drove out to a winery in the Willamette Valley. Dominic didn't know about that one. She's seen how I live." Dominic turned his beer glass on the bar. "And she just didn't mention the company. She didn't mention it. That's either a very good sign or a very weird sign." Ryan looked at the article again. The photo was professional, formal, Victoria in a conference setting, which looked nothing like the woman who'd gotten Thai food sauce on her sleeve and sworn about it at a picnic table. Same person, different context. He thought about the conversations they'd had, about what she'd asked him and what she'd shared. He thought about the way she'd said, "I had nothing to lose after that," when she talked about the startup implosion, and how he'd felt the truth of it without knowing the full scale of what she'd built after. "She wanted to be a person first," he said. Dominic looked at him. "She wanted someone to talk to her like a person before they knew what she was worth. That's not weird. That makes complete sense to me. You're not bothered." "I didn't say I wasn't bothered. I said it makes sense." Ryan put the phone back face down. "I'm going to talk to her about it." "Yeah, you probably should." "I will. Tonight." Dominic nodded slowly. Then, $400 million, man. I heard you the first time. I'm just saying it again for the experience. He called her at 9. She answered on the second ring, and he could tell from the ambient sound that she was still at work. There was the particular quality of a large quiet space, the hum of a building at night. "Hey," she said. "I was going to call you. Rough day." "Dominic showed me an article," Ryan said. Silence. "About Nexus Solutions," he added. More silence. Then, "Okay. I'm not angry. You sound a little like you might be. I'm working through it." He was sitting on the balcony again, which was becoming his place for important phone calls, apparently. "I want to understand why you didn't mention it. Not to accuse you, I genuinely want to understand." He heard her breathe, the kind of breath that was also a decision. "Every time I tell someone what I do in the first conversation," she said slowly, "the whole conversation becomes about that. The company, the valuation, what I'm building, where we're expanding, whether I have an exit strategy. And suddenly the person they were talking to 5 minutes ago is replaced by a version of me that they've decided already exists." A pause. "I was tired of being that version before someone actually knew me. How long were you planning to tell me?" "I was waiting until it felt—" She stopped, started again. "I was waiting until I was sure it wouldn't change things. It doesn't change things. You don't know that yet." "Victoria." He leaned forward, elbows on the balcony rail. "I liked you because you argued with me about the weather. I'm not going to stop because you run a company. You're allowed to be upset that I didn't tell you. I am upset. I'm also not leaving. Those can both be true." Another pause. When she spoke again, something in her voice had shifted slightly. Not quite softer. More honest, maybe. "The men I've dated before, when they found out, the dynamic changed. Either they got strange about the money, or they decided my professional persona was the real me, and the person I'd shown them was the performance." She paused. "I was preemptively protecting myself from that, which I know is not entirely fair to you." "It's not, but I understand it." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I'd have done something similar if I were you." He meant it. He'd spent 4 years keeping Ellie somewhat protected from the people he dated. The same instinct, different stakes. I'm going to need you not to do it again, though. I mean it. Whatever it is. Tell me. I will, she said, and then, I'm sorry. I know. He listened to the quiet for a moment. You should go home. It's late. I have a board prep call at 10. That's still, Victoria, it's 9 o'clock. I know. She didn't say anything else about it, which meant she was going to stay until the call was done and probably after. He decided not to push it. She'd find the edge of her own schedule eventually, and it wasn't his job to manage it. Call me when you're home, he said. She did, at 11:30, and they talked for another 40 minutes about nothing important. A thing she'd seen on her walk to the parking garage, a fact about cephalopods that Ellie had apparently left cached in his brain from her documentary phase. And by the time they hung up, he felt like himself again, which was the whole point. He introduced her to Ellie on a Saturday in October, 6 weeks in. He kept it small and low stakes. Victoria was coming for lunch, they were going to eat sandwiches, and Ellie could ask whatever she wanted within reason. Ellie had responded to this briefing by cleaning her room without being asked, which Ryan noted and did not comment on. Victoria showed up at noon with a box of pastries from the bakery near Tavola, the one Ryan had mentioned that opened at 5 in the morning, and handed them to Ellie at the door with the directness of someone who'd decided not to overthink the handoff. Ellie looked in the box, looked up at Victoria. Did you get these from the good bakery? Your dad said it was the best one. Ellie looked at Ryan with an expression that meant she'd upgraded her assessment. He's right about that one, not about everything. What's he wrong about? Victoria asked, stepping inside. February is worse than November. Victoria turned to Ryan with her expression very carefully controlled. She's right, she said. Ryan pointed at both of them. This is already a problem. Lunch was not the smooth, well-orchestrated introduction Ryan had been quietly hoping for. Ellie asked Victoria questions with the methodical energy of someone conducting an interview. What was the hardest thing about her job? What did she have for breakfast? Did she know how bridges worked? And, with no transition, had she ever been to Japan? Victoria answered all of it without flinching. She said the hardest thing about her job was getting people to disagree with her, because most people told her what they thought she wanted to hear, which made it hard to find the real problems. She said she had a protein bar and coffee for breakfast, which was bad, and she knew it. She said she knew how bridges worked in approximate terms. She said she hadn't been to Japan, but she wanted to. Ellie processed this. Ryan says Japan has really good train systems. That's true. He wants to take me when I'm 10. She looked at Ryan. You said 10. I said maybe 10. You said 10. Back to Victoria. He forgets things he says. I'm going to say this once, Ryan said. I'm being ganged up on. I want it noted. Victoria looked at Ellie. Noted, she said. For the record. Ellie grinned. The full one. The one she had no control over. And Ryan watched it happen and felt something go loose in his chest that had been held tight for a long time. After lunch, Ellie showed Victoria the drawings on her bedroom wall, narrating each one with the confidence of an artist explaining their portfolio. Victoria stood in the doorway of the small room and looked at the drawings with genuine attention, asking questions about the ones she didn't understand. When she got to the drawing of Ryan and the bridge, she stood there for a moment. He mentioned this, she said. I told him the bridge has feelings, Ellie said. He didn't believe me. I believe it, Victoria said. Ellie looked at her. You can tell? I work in tech. I believe that systems have something like feelings, especially ones that have been under stress for a long time. She glanced at Ryan in the doorway with something in her expression he couldn't quite name. They show it eventually. Ellie decided this was correct and moved on to the next drawing, and Ryan leaned in the doorframe and watched his daughter walk this woman through every picture on her wall and thought about how rarely anything actually went the way you expected, and how sometimes that was the best possible outcome. But October turned to November and the rain came in earnest and the days compressed. Ryan's project hit a 3-week delay because of the materials issue, which cost money he didn't have and required the kind of creative scheduling he was good at, but that ate his evenings. Victoria's company was in a growth period. She'd mention it obliquely, pieces of it, board conversations and hiring decisions, and a potential partnership that she was skeptical of. And Ryan learned to read the weight of her voice on the phone and calibrate accordingly. They were imperfect at it. There were nights when he was too tired to be good company and knew it. There were evenings when she was distracted in ways she couldn't fully explain, still holding the professional caution that had become second nature over years of being in charge of things. They had a genuine argument once in November over something so minor he'd half forgotten the catalyst. Something about a plan changing last minute that Ryan hadn't been given enough notice of. And it spiraled briefly into the bigger thing underneath it, which was that he needed reliability in ways that were non-negotiable. And she was accustomed to her schedule bending to the company rather than to people. They'd worked it out over a long phone call, not perfectly, but honestly, with the specific awkwardness of two people who were new to each other's fault lines and learning in real time where they were. Ryan didn't like fighting. He'd spent Ellie's early years with a short-fuse version of himself that he'd worked hard to reshape, and his instinct under conflict was now to go flat and quiet rather than to escalate, which Victoria found difficult to read at first. "I can't tell if you're okay or if you're done," she said at one point during the call. "I'm not done. I just need to think before I talk when I'm angry. I need you to tell me that when it's happening. When you go quiet, I assume, I know what you assume. I'm telling you it's not that." A pause. "Okay. I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I want to be clear about that. But I need you to treat the schedule like I exist in it." "You're right," she said, without qualifier. Just, "You're right, and I'll do better." No defending or deflecting. He'd noticed this about her. She could admit when she was wrong cleanly and without drama, and it was one of the more attractive things about her. He made dinner for her twice that month at his apartment. She came over both times still in work clothes and shed the composure gradually over the course of the evening, like a building decompressing after everyone had gone home. The second time Ellie was there, and they all three ate pasta around the kitchen table while Ellie explained a disagreement she'd had with her teacher about the categorization of certain dinosaurs. And Victoria argued Ellie's side with such specific biological reasoning that Ellie stopped mid-sentence and stared at her. "How do you know that?" Ellie demanded. "I read a lot," Victoria said. "What kind of stuff?" "Everything. Mostly things that have nothing to do with my job." Ellie looked at Ryan. "She's smart." "I know," Ryan said. "Not smart like a teacher. Smart like she's actually interested." Victoria kept her expression neutral, but Ryan caught the flicker in it, something that had been aimed at her like an insult before, and landed this time like it was supposed to, as the compliment it was. After dinner, Ellie went to her room and Ryan washed up and Victoria dried, which she'd started doing without asking the second time and he hadn't questioned. They stood at the kitchen sink with the radio on low, a station that mostly played older R&B, which Ryan had put on without thinking about it, and worked through the dishes in a comfortable quiet that felt like something you had to earn. "She's good," Victoria said. "She's the best person I know." "That's a high bar." "She earned it." Victoria handed him a dish to put away. He reached past her for the cabinet, and for a moment they were very close together in the narrow kitchen, and he looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them moved for a second. "I don't say things I don't mean," she said quietly. "I know. What I said to you on the phone, that I'll do better, I meant it." "I know that too." She held his gaze. There was something in her eyes that he'd caught glimpses of before, something that had been kept in careful storage, brought out rarely, maybe shown to almost nobody. Not fragility, exactly. More like the part of a person that hasn't been used in a while. The part that trusts. He kissed her, there in the kitchen with the radio on. She kissed him back. And it was not the dramatic movie version of a first kiss, but it was real and unhurried, and when they separated, she was quiet for a moment in the good way, the way where something has settled rather than stirred up. "About time," she said. "I was being respectful." "You were being slow." "I prefer deliberate." She made a sound that was half laugh and half exhale. Ryan turned back to the dishes, and they finished them in silence, and then she sat at the kitchen table while he put things away, and he made coffee, and they talked until 11 o'clock about everything and nothing, the way people do when they've stopped calculating how much of themselves to show. "Tet," The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt tentative and real at the same time, like learning to walk on new ground without knowing how solid it was yet. Ellie began asking when Victoria was coming over with a casualness that suggested she'd moved her from the category of event to the category of person, which Ryan understood was a threshold and treated accordingly. Victoria was busy in a way that was constant and partially invisible to him. She carried the company like a second skeleton, always there, structuring everything underneath. He accepted this, imperfectly. There were moments when he wanted more of her than the schedule allowed, and he swallowed it. And there were moments when she wanted to tell him things she still wasn't sure how to translate across the distance between their working lives, and she swallowed that. They were both doing the labor of it, which was all you could ask. One evening in late November, she showed up at his door without calling first. Unusual for her, she almost always texted ahead. And she was still in her work clothes and looked like she'd had the kind of day that strips the varnish off everything. He opened the door and she said nothing for a second, just looked at him. "Rough one," she finally said. "Come in." "Ellie, at Mrs. Okafor's. School thing tomorrow. She wanted to do her makeup." Victoria stepped inside. He closed the door behind her. She stood in the hallway still holding her bag, and he took it from her hand and set it on the chair, and she let him, which meant she was more hollowed out than usual. "What happened?" he asked. "Two board members had a conversation about me that I wasn't supposed to hear." She sat on the couch. He sat on the other end, turned toward her. "About whether my quote-unquote personal decisions were affecting my focus." "What personal decisions?" She looked at him. "Us," Ryan said. "Apparently I've been distracted." She said the word with a particular flatness that told him how much it had cost her to hear it, which is laughable considering this quarter is the best we've had. But sure. Ryan watched her face. She was doing the thing she did when she was furious, keeping it contained so that you could only see it if you knew where to look. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Nothing yet. I need to think." She leaned back against the cushions. "I've been here before. Not exactly here. But the version where someone decides that my private life is their data point. This is different. Is it? It's not a business decision. It's someone trying to control you with something that isn't their business to begin with." She was quiet for a moment. "I know that. I want to make sure you know I'm not going anywhere over this." "I know. Because if this is the part where you decide it's easier to—" "Ryan," she looked at him directly. "I didn't come here to break up with you. I came here because you're the only person I wanted to talk to." He held that for a second. The only person. He knew what that meant from her, understood the weight of what she didn't give away easily. "Okay," he said. "Okay." She exhaled. "I'm sorry to just show up." "Don't do that. Don't apologize for coming." She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her went slightly less rigid, the way a jaw finally unclenches after being held for hours without knowing. "I'm really tired," she said. Not complaining, just stating it. "I know. You can stay, if you want." She considered. "I have an early call. I have an early site visit. We can both be tired together." The corner of her mouth moved. She looked around his small living room, the drawings Ellie had pinned to the corkboard near the hallway, the broken cabinet hinge he still hadn't fixed, the stack of bridge specifications on the side table that he'd been reviewing all week. "I like it here," she said quietly. "I know that probably sounds strange given—" She gestured in a general way that he understood meant the office, the company, the building she worked in that cost more per square foot than his entire block. "But I mean it. It doesn't sound strange. It's small. It's enough." She looked at him. "Yeah," she said slowly. "It is." He got up and made tea because it was that kind of evening, and she sat on his couch in her work clothes and at some point pulled her knees up and tucked her feet under her like she'd been sitting on this couch for years, and they talked until late. And when she fell asleep on the couch halfway through a sentence, he got a blanket and put it over her and stood there for a second in the quiet of his apartment. The city made its sounds outside. The heater clicked. Somewhere down the hall, Ellie was asleep in her room surrounded by her drawings. Ryan turned off the lamp and sat in the chair across from the couch, and just stayed there for a while in the dark, not needing to do anything about anything. Some things you didn't push, some things you let find their own level. He could see it already, the shape of what this was becoming, and it didn't scare him. It felt more than anything like something he'd been slowly building toward without knowing he was building at all. The board members who'd had that conversation about Victoria didn't know she'd heard them. She'd been walking back from the restroom on the 14th floor when she caught her name through a conference room door left 2 inches open. The particular acoustic accident of a building that was otherwise very good at keeping secrets. She'd stood there for 4 seconds, long enough to get the shape of it, and then walked back to her office and closed her own door and sat at her desk until her breathing evened out. She hadn't told Ryan all of it that night on his couch. She told him the surface version: board members, personal decisions, focus. What she hadn't said was the specific language. She's playing house with a construction worker and she thinks nobody notices the time it costs. That was Walter Fenn, 63, 15% equity stake, a man who had backed her early and believed this gave him a particular ownership of her choices that she had been managing carefully for 3 years. The second voice had been quieter and she'd only caught fragments, but the tone was enough. She sat with it for 2 weeks without doing anything, which was her way. She needed to understand the full shape of a problem before she moved. The company was performing. Q3 numbers were strong. The Pacific Northwest expansion she'd been building toward for 18 months was close to closing a major enterprise contract that would change their market position. None of this was affected by who she ate dinner with. But that was the rational argument, and Walter Fenn was not a rational problem. He was a legacy problem, the kind that accumulated slowly and expressed itself sideways. She didn't mention any of this to Ryan in December because December was already loaded. His bridge project was in final push before a city deadline that got moved twice, which meant he was working 6 days a week and coming home later than he should, and Ellie had a holiday performance at school that Ryan had missed the rehearsal for because of a site emergency and felt visibly terrible about. Victoria had gone to the performance. Ryan hadn't asked her to, she'd offered, and he'd looked at her with the particular expression he had when something surprised him in a way he was unprepared for. She sat in the school auditorium between Mrs. Okafor and a parent she didn't know, and watched Ellie stand in the second row of the chorus and sing with her whole face, the way kids do before they learn to be self-conscious about it. Afterward, Ellie had found them in the lobby and told Victoria that she'd looked for her in the audience and found her because of her coat, which was a specific dark blue that Ellie said was easy to spot. "You looked for me?" Victoria asked. "I looked for Ryan first," Ellie said plainly. "Then you." Victoria had told Ryan this later, and he'd gone quiet in the way he did when he was moved and didn't want to show the full scale of it. "Second place," he finally said. "She told me I was easy to spot. I'll take it." They had Christmas at Ryan's apartment, just the 3 of them, plus Dominic and his girlfriend Priya, who was a landscape architect and took to Ellie immediately in a way that made the evening feel easier than Victoria had expected. She'd brought things for the meal rather than a gift, because Ryan had told her early on that Ellie didn't need more things, she needed experiences, and Victoria had taken note of that and kept it. She'd also brought Ellie a book about deep-sea creatures, an actual marine biology text, but illustrated, that she'd found at a shop downtown after remembering the documentary Ellie had been obsessed with. Ellie opened it and turned to the section on bioluminescent organisms and looked up at Victoria with an expression that Victoria felt in places she couldn't name. "This is a real book," Ellie said, "not a kid book. You're smart enough for a real book." Ellie looked at Ryan. "I like her." "I know," Ryan said, from the kitchen doorway, and his voice was even, but his eyes were something else entirely. It was a good evening. The food was good. The apartment was warm. Dominic told stories about Ryan at 19 that Ryan disputed with increasing urgency while the table laughed at him. And at the end of the night, after Dominic and Priya had gone and Ellie was asleep, Victoria helped Ryan wash up, and they stood in the kitchen afterward, and she thought, this is what the word home was always supposed to mean. Not a building. This. She drove back to her apartment across the river and sat in her car in the parking garage for a few minutes in the dark, just sitting. She knew something was coming. She'd known it since the conference room door. She just didn't know yet what shape it would take. The shape revealed itself in January. It started the way these things always start, with a small item, easy to miss, on a tech blog that had 200,000 subscribers. The headline was casual, almost gossipy. Nexus Solutions CEO's new relationship raises eyebrows among investors. The article was short, sourced to nobody by name, and said almost nothing specific, just that Victoria Bennett had been seen regularly with a man described as not from her professional world, and that some investors were monitoring the situation. Victoria read it at 6 in the morning on her phone before she got out of bed. She read it twice, put her phone down, and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then she got up and made coffee and went to work. By the time she arrived at the office, the article had been picked up by 2 larger tech news sites. By noon, it had developed a comments section that she was advised by her PR person, a capable woman named Dana Chu, not to read. She read it anyway. She stopped after 10 minutes because Dana was right. She called Ryan from her office at 1:30, door closed. "Have you seen it?" she asked. "Dominic texted me," he said. "Yeah. I want to manage your expectations about what's probably going to happen over the next few days." "How bad?" "I don't know yet. Probably worse before it gets better." A pause on his end. She could hear a sight sound behind him. Machinery. Wind. He was on the bridge project. "Are you okay?" "I'm functional." "That's not what I asked." She turned her chair toward the window. Portland winter sky, the kind that was the color of old concrete. "I'm not panicking, but I'm watching something that was private stop being private. That's a specific kind of bad feeling." "I know," he said. And he did know, she thought. He'd had his life under other people's assessment for different reasons. A single father, a blue-collar worker in a city that was gentrifying around him, and the specific irritation of being categorized by people who hadn't bothered to look properly was not foreign to him. "The thing that bothers me most," she said, "is the not from her professional world line, like the only world that counts is the professional one. I noticed that. It implies that someone from outside that world is, what? A liability? A lapse of judgment?" "Victoria," his voice was steady, "do you want to talk through the practical side of what to expect, or do you need to be angry for a minute first?" She stopped, then, "Angry first." "Okay, go." She went. Not loudly, she kept her voice even because the office had glass walls. But she said what she actually thought about Walter Fenn and the board members who'd been having conversations behind doors and the particular brand of investor who believed that funding a woman's company meant purchasing some portion of her personal narrative. She said it clearly and completely, and Ryan listened without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "Feel better?" "Marginally." "Good. Now the practical side. What do you need from me?" That was the thing about him. He didn't make it about himself. He didn't say "I'm fine with it" or "don't worry about me" in the self-congratulatory way that would have actually been about him. He just asked what she needed. "I need you to be prepared for the possibility that your name is going to be in some things you won't enjoy," she said. "And I need you to tell me honestly if it becomes a problem for you." "It won't. Ryan, I'm a grown man with a job and a daughter. Some tech blog's opinion of my relationship is not a problem I have capacity to worry about." A beat. "Now, practical. What do you need from me?" She exhaled. "Nothing, yet. Let me see how it develops." "Okay. Call me tonight." "I will." "Victoria." His voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but more direct, more personal. "Whatever these people say, you know what this is, right?" She looked at the window, the concrete sky. "Yeah," she said, "I do." "Good. That's the only thing that matters." She sat with that for a moment after they hung up. Then she opened her email and started working through the 37 unread messages that had arrived since noon. My turn. It developed over the following week in 3 distinct directions simultaneously, and each one was its own particular form of pressure. The first direction was media. 3 more pieces ran that week, each one more specific than the last. By Thursday, someone had gotten a photograph, a long lens shot taken outside the Lebanese restaurant from their second date months ago. Ryan in his work jacket and Victoria in her dark coat standing on the sidewalk. The photo was not unflattering to either of them, but that was not the point. The point was that someone had been watching, had been waiting, and had decided that this was a story worth packaging. The accompanying piece was in a business publication Victoria generally respected, which made it worse. The headline was "Restrained: The Personal and Professional Life of Portland's Tech Darling." And the article itself wasn't cruel, but it was thorough in a way that felt invasive, and it included quotes from two unnamed sources close to the company who used words like distraction and optics. The second direction was the board. Walter Fenn requested a one-on-one meeting, which Victoria granted because refusing would have been worse. He came to her office on a Wednesday with the careful pleasantness of someone who wanted her to feel that this was collegial. He sat across her desk and talked about the company's profile, about the importance of perception during a growth phase, about his hope that she was taking care of herself. He never said Ryan's name. He never said anything specific enough to be contested. This was the thing he was good at, the conversation that communicated exactly what he meant while remaining technically about nothing. Victoria listened to the whole thing. When he was done, she said, "Thank you for your concern, Walter. The quarter is strong, the expansion contract is on track, and my focus is exactly where it needs to be. Was there anything specific about company performance you wanted to discuss?" He'd smiled, said no, just checking in. Left. She sat at her desk for 5 minutes after he was gone and breathed. The third direction was the one she hadn't anticipated. His name was Caleb Marsh, and he was the man who had left her at Tavola 4 months ago. She saw it first as a comment on one of the news articles. A verified account, a man with a professional headshot, writing something that managed to be simultaneously self-serving and designed to look remorseful. I had the chance to know Victoria Bennett, and I made a mistake I regret. She's an extraordinary person. The comment had been liked 300 times by the time she saw it. 2 journalists had already screenshotted it. Then came the direct message on LinkedIn. Victoria, I've been following the coverage and I feel terrible about how I treated you. I was wrong and I know that now. I'd like to talk if you're open to it. Caleb. She read it once. She closed LinkedIn. She called Dana Chu and told her to watch for Caleb Marsh's name and flag anything that came through from him or about him. Who is he? Dana asked. Someone who made a calculation, Victoria said, and now he's recalculating. She didn't tell Ryan about the LinkedIn message that night. She didn't tell him the next night either. She told herself she was managing the timeline, waiting until she understood the full picture. What was more honest was that some part of her didn't want to bring Caleb Marsh into the space that she and Ryan occupied, didn't want that man's name in those conversations. She told him on a Saturday, at his apartment. They were on the couch after dinner, Ellie asleep, the television on low. She picked up her phone and showed him the LinkedIn message without preamble. Ryan read it. His expression didn't change much. He set the phone down on the cushion between them. "When did you get this?" he asked. 4 days ago? His jaw moved slightly. "You've been sitting on it for 4 days. I wanted to think about how to handle it. You could have thought out loud with me." "I know, I didn't." She held his gaze. "I'm sorry." He looked at the phone for a moment. "What does he want?" He saw the coverage. He saw that I have a company worth $400 million and that I'm someone people are paying attention to. He made a mistake and now he wants to revise it. She said it flatly, without emotion, because the emotion would have been contempt and she'd already spent it. He doesn't want me. He wants the version of me that appeared in the articles. What are you going to do? Nothing. I'm not responding. Ryan nodded slowly. He looked like he was working through something, and she let him work through it. I need you to not sit on things like this, he said finally. I told you before. I meant it. I know. This is exactly the kind of thing I can handle it, Victoria. I'm not going to fall apart because some guy sent you a message, but I need to know. You're right. I feel like I keep asking you to loop me in, and you keep almost doing it. She took a breath. I know. I've been managing things by myself for a long time. The habit of it is deep. I get that. His voice was even, not angry. I do. But you're not by yourself right now. She looked at him. This man on his worn couch in his small apartment that he'd filled with a good life from nothing particular who came home dirty from physical work every day and made dinner and helped with homework and called his daughter's school when he needed to and asked for nothing from anyone, who didn't flinch when a board member's opinion showed up in print, and who asked, "What do you need from me?" before he asked anything about himself. "I know I'm not," she said. "I'm still learning what that means." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Not acceptance exactly, more like acknowledgement. The register you use when you understand something is a process, and you're willing to stay in it. "Okay," he said. She leaned her shoulder against his, and he didn't move away, and they sat there watching nothing on the television, and she thought about Caleb Marsh, who had looked at her across a restaurant table and done the math and come up short, and about how completely she had stopped thinking about him until he forced himself back into view by other means. The story broke fully in the third week of January. Not the tech blog, not the business publication. A lifestyle magazine with a large digital following ran a feature titled "The CEO and the Construction Worker, Love, Class, and the New Power Couple." It had photos, the Tavala one, and others Ryan hadn't known were being taken, which meant someone had been watching for a while. It had quotes from unnamed sources on both sides. It had a sidebar about class dynamics in tech culture, and another one about Victoria's background that was accurate but felt forensic. It had, at the bottom, a brief quote from Caleb Marsh that he'd apparently given willingly, describing his regret and calling Victoria one of the most impressive people I've met. Dana Chu sent Ryan's name in a message to Victoria at 7 in the morning. "It's out. Full piece. You need to see it before you come in." Victoria read it in her car in the parking garage, same spot she'd sat in on Christmas night. She read the whole thing without moving. Then she started the car and drove to the office. By the time she arrived, the board had already sent a meeting request for Friday, a full session, not a check-in. Dana had 3 call requests from journalists. 2 investors had emailed. Her assistant, a young man named James, who had worked for her for 2 years and was unshakable, handed her a coffee and her schedule and said nothing about any of it, which she appreciated deeply. The comments online were where the real picture was. Half of them were supportive. People who found something in the story that resonated, who responded to the class element or the personal element, or simply to the fact that she'd met someone while sitting alone at a table after being humiliated. She hadn't told anyone that part, but apparently someone had, or someone had inferred it, because it was in the article in vague terms. And those were the comments that stuck with her in ways she hadn't expected. She deserves someone who stayed. This is what self-respect looks like. Good for her. The other half were ugly in the way comment sections always had the capacity to be ugly, and she stopped reading those after 90 seconds. She called Ryan at 8:30. "I've seen it," he said before she could speak. He was clearly outside. She could hear the sight sounds, the particular wind off the Willamette. Dominic called. Of course he did. "Are you okay?" "I'm in problem-solving mode right now. Ask me again tonight." "Okay." A pause. "Victoria, the part about how we met, is that in the article?" "A version of it." Silence for a moment. "Is that okay with you?" She thought about it, sitting at that table, the chair, the way the restaurant had gone slightly quiet. "The true version would be okay with me," she said. "The version in the article is impressionistic." "Do you want me to do anything?" "Nothing. Don't comment on anything. Don't respond to anything. Just go to work." "That I can do." He paused again. I want to say this clearly. I'm not embarrassed by this. I don't care what the article says about the difference between our lives. The only thing I care about is whether this is hurting you." She sat with that for a second. "It's not hurting me," she said. "It's making me tired." "Yeah, that makes sense. The board wants a meeting Friday." "About us." "About optics." She said the word the way she would say something that tasted wrong. "They want to discuss optics during our best quarter in 3 years. Ryan's voice was quiet and steady. "What are you going to say?" "I don't know yet. I'm thinking. You'll figure it out." "You don't know that." "I know that you've built a $400 million company from a startup implosion. I think you can manage a board meeting." She almost smiled. Not quite. "You're annoying when you're rational." "It's a gift." She heard the site foreman calling his name in the background, and he said he had to go, and she told him she'd call tonight, and she sat at her desk after they hung up and opened her calendar and looked at Friday, the box of it, the meeting request with its formal language about quarterly review and stakeholder alignment. Walter Fenn would be there. The two board members whose voices she'd heard through the conference room door would be there. There would be the particular atmosphere of people who wanted to say something specific and had organized the procedural architecture around it very carefully. She'd been in these rooms before. She'd built her way through harder situations than this one with less to stand on. What was different now was that this time the thing they were trying to use against her was not a business decision or a strategic call, but a person, a good person who had crossed a restaurant to offer her a chair when nobody else moved, who made pasta in a kitchen with a broken cabinet hinge and raised a daughter who drew feelings on bridges. She opened a blank document on her computer and stared at it. She started typing. Not a defense, not an argument. Something else. Something she'd been composing in pieces for weeks without knowing it, that was now taking on a shape she recognized. Dana knocked and opened the door. "The 8:45 is ready for you." 2 minutes. Victoria looked at what she'd written. 8 sentences. The beginning of something that felt, for the first time in weeks, like solid ground. She saved the document, closed her laptop, and stood up. Whatever was coming on Friday, she was done waiting for it. Quote, Thursday evening, Ryan came to her apartment for the first time. She'd always gone to his, partly logistics, partly because his place was where Ellie was, partly because she'd been slow to let him into all of the corners of her life. But Thursday evening, she asked him to come to her, and he arrived at 7 with takeout containers from a Thai place and looked around her apartment with the unhurried interest of someone taking inventory. It was a good apartment, large, clean-lined, the kind of space that a certain income level made available. The Willamette visible from the living room windows, high ceilings, a kitchen that was fully equipped and rarely used. She watched him look at it without any visible judgment, just looking. "It's very you," he said. "Meaning what?" "Organized, functional, nice light." He set the food on her kitchen island. "Where are your takeout plates?" "Second cabinet, on the left." He found them. She watched him move through her kitchen with the ease of someone who was comfortable in kitchens generally, and something in her relaxed that she hadn't known was tight. They ate at her kitchen counter because her dining table had her open laptop and 3 file folders on it, which was its usual state. Ryan looked at the folders. "Board prep?" he asked. "I've been writing something for tomorrow. Can I read it?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she went to the table, picked up the folder with her printed notes, and handed it to him. He set down his chopsticks and read it. She watched his face while he did, ate a piece of tofu, watched his eyes move through the pages. He finished, set the folder down, was quiet for a moment. "This isn't a defense," he said. "No. You're not defending the relationship. You're going on offense about what they're doing." "I'm naming it," she said, "what they're actually doing, which is applying a standard to my private life that they don't apply to anyone else in that room, and have never applied to anyone else in the history of the company. And the reason they're applying it to me specifically is because I'm a woman who runs a successful company while also having a body they have opinions about. And when someone who doesn't fit their idea of an appropriate partner found me worth knowing, that made them uncomfortable." Ryan looked at her. "You're going to say all of that in the meeting. I'm going to say it once, clearly, and then I'm going to move to the quarter numbers and the expansion contract, and I'm going to make it very difficult for anyone in that room to explain why we're talking about anything other than those numbers." He picked up the folder again and looked at one section. "This part, where you say the same board members questioned your appearance in your first year. That happened? It'll make them angry." "Yes." "Are you prepared for angry?" "I've been prepared for angry for my entire career." She said it without drama. "Every room I've ever walked into where I wasn't expected, someone in it was angry about my presence before I opened my mouth. I know what to do with angry." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression she'd seen before, but not this fully. Not admiration exactly. Something more grounded. Recognition. Like he was seeing the complete version of something that had been partially visible before. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "I was going to say be careful," he said, "but you don't need me to say that. You've already thought through everything I would say." I thought through it, and I'm doing it anyway. That's different from not having thought it through. She picked up her chopsticks. Dominic said something similar about you once, that you think through the risk and then you go anyway. He talks too much. He's right about you. Ryan turned back to his food. The city lights were coming on outside the windows. After a while, he reached over and put his hand over hers on the counter, not romantically, just the particular placement of a hand that means I'm here, and she turned hers over without thinking, and they sat like that for a while eating Thai food at her kitchen counter while Portland went dark outside the windows. After tomorrow, she said, either this is over or it gets louder. Which do you think? She looked at the windows, thought about Walter Fenn's smile. Louder first, then over. Then that's what it is. She looked at him. You're not going to tell me it'll be fine? It might not be fine in the short run, he said, but you'll handle it, and I'll be there while you're handling it. She nodded. That was the right answer. She'd have been suspicious of it'll be fine. What he'd given her instead was the truth, which was that it might be hard, and she wouldn't be going through it alone. And both of those things were more useful than false reassurance had ever been. She closed the folder and put it back on the table and came back to the kitchen counter, and they ate the rest of their dinner and talked about something Ellie had said to Mrs. Okafor that was apparently making the rounds of the building as a piece of 8-year-old philosophy. And the evening went quiet and real and settled, the way the evenings at his apartment went. Except here, in her space, in the apartment that was organized and functional and had good light and had always felt, before now, like a place she slept between work sessions. She lay awake after he left, staring at the ceiling with the folder on the nightstand. Tomorrow was a room she'd been in the shape of her whole life. Tomorrow was people who had decided what she was and were going to defend that decision. She'd built the company from nothing. She'd done it without asking for permission and without making herself smaller and without becoming the version of herself that rooms full of people kept designing for her. She was not going to stop now. She turned off the light. The Friday board meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning, which meant Victoria was at her desk by 7:15 with coffee she didn't taste and the folder open in front of her, reading through her notes one more time, not because she needed to, but because the act of reading steadied her hands. James came in at 7:45 and set a second coffee on her desk without being asked. He'd been her assistant for 2 years and had the quality of someone who understood that the most useful thing he could do in certain moments was to move quietly and not require anything from her. The Harmon conference room is set up, he said. I moved the 8:30 off your calendar. Thank you. Dana's coming in at 8. She wants 5 minutes before the meeting. Tell her 4. He nodded and left. Victoria looked at her notes. 8 pages of dense but organized thinking, the kind of document you created not to read from, but to prove to yourself that you'd thought it through completely. She'd been in adversarial rooms before, funding pitches where she was the youngest person and the only woman, acquisition conversations where the other side assumed she'd eventually take the offer if they were patient enough, regulatory meetings where the city wanted things from the company that the company couldn't give without compromising what it was. Each time, the same preparation. Know the room, know the argument, know the point where you stop defending and go forward instead. The difference today was that the attack was personal in a way the others hadn't been. Every other adversarial room had been about the company's decisions. This one was about hers. Dana arrived at 8 with the brisk energy she carried everywhere, a leather notebook under her arm, and the look of someone who had already read everything that had published overnight and organized it into action items. Caleb Marsh gave another quote, Dana said, sitting across from Victoria without preamble. This time to the Portland Business Journal. Same general tone. He made a mistake. He wishes her well. He's doing a slow media rehabilitation at her expense. I know. Do you want me to respond to it? Silence is its own response. If we engage with him, we make him relevant. Agreed. Dana flipped open her notebook. The magazine piece has been shared 40,000 times as of this morning. Comments are running about 60-40 in your favor. 2 of your major enterprise clients sent emails, both supportive for what it's worth. The expansion contract partner Carson Group has not said anything publicly. They won't. Ian Carson is too professional to comment on media coverage. The board composition today is Fenn, Hargrove, Lim, Park, and Whitmore. Whitmore emailed me last night off the record. Victoria looked up. Saying what? That she doesn't agree with why this meeting was called. She'll be in the room, but she wanted you to know. Patricia Whitmore was 61, a former COO of a mid-sized logistics company, and had joined the board 18 months ago. Victoria had always found her to be the clearest thinker in the room. The fact that she'd reached out was meaningful. Good, Victoria said. That's good. Are you going to use the notes in there? Dana nodded toward the folder. Not directly. I know what I'm going to say. Dana looked at her for a moment with the frank assessment she kept mostly hidden behind her professional composure. How are you? Victoria folded her hands on the desk. Ready? That's not the same thing. No, Victoria said. It isn't, but it's what I have. Gautam. The Harmon conference room was the largest on the 14th floor, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows on the north side, and the long table that Victoria had always thought was slightly too large for the room, designed to impress rather than to facilitate. The board members arrived over a span of 15 minutes, the quiet accumulation of people who were aware that something significant was happening and were calibrating their expressions accordingly. Walter Fenn arrived last, which was not accidental. He sat at the far end of the table with his customary pleasantness and looked at Victoria with the expression she'd learned to recognize over 3 years, the one that communicated, with no specific language to contest, that he was doing this for her own good. David Hargrove was to Fenn's left, a man who had never said anything directly hostile to Victoria, but whose silences contained multitudes. Michelle Lim, their tech sector advisor, sat with her laptop open and her expression neutral. James Park, their newest board member and the one with the smallest equity stake, looked slightly uncomfortable in the way of someone who hadn't been in this kind of room before and wasn't sure of the rules. Patricia Whitmore sat to Victoria's right and opened her notebook without making eye contact with anyone. Victoria let them settle. She did not open the folder in front of her. Fenn began in the register she'd expected, measured, collegial, framed as concern. He spoke about the company's visibility, about the growth phase, about stakeholder confidence during expansion periods. He referenced the media coverage without naming it directly. He used the word perception 4 times in 6 minutes, which Victoria counted. When he finished, there was a brief silence, and Hargrove said, "The Carson Group contract is our highest priority this quarter. We want to make sure nothing is distracting from that execution." Victoria looked at him. "The Carson contract is on track. We close in 3 weeks. The distraction, as far as I can identify it, is this meeting." Hargrove blinked slightly. Fenn's pleasant expression held. "Victoria," Fenn said, "no one is questioning your professional performance. Then I'd like to understand what we're doing here," she said. She kept her voice even, not aggressive, simply direct, the way you speak when you're done with the preamble. "Because the meeting request referenced stakeholder alignment and quarterly review, and we've spent the last 7 minutes talking about media coverage of my personal life. So let's be clear about what the actual agenda is." Fenn's expression shifted a fraction. "We're concerned about the company's public image at a critical—" "I heard a conversation," Victoria said. The room went still. She hadn't planned to open with it. She'd planned to build to it. But she was looking at Fenn's carefully managed expression and Hargrove's blinking discomfort, and something in her decided that the building was unnecessary. She'd already done the work. The foundation was there. 3 months ago, she said, on this floor. I was walking back from the east stairwell and a conference room door was open. I heard 2 voices. I heard the words playing house and construction worker, and time it costs. She looked at Fenn directly. I recognized both voices. The silence was a different quality now. Whitmore's pen was still. Park was looking at the table. Lim had closed her laptop. Fenn said, "Victoria, that conversation was—" "I'm not finished." She said it quietly. No edge, just the flat certainty of someone who has decided they're going to speak completely. I've been managing this company for 6 years. I took it from a failed startup's wreckage to $400 million in valuation. I have done this while navigating rooms full of people who had opinions about how I looked, about my age, about the fact that I don't have the background most people in my position have. I have been professional about all of it. I have been patient. I have been, she paused, choosing the next word deliberately, accommodating. Nobody spoke. What I will not accommodate, she continued, is a board meeting called to address the fact that I'm in a relationship with someone who builds bridges for a living. I will not accommodate the implication that my judgment is impaired because I chose someone who is, by any honest measure, a better person than most of the men this room would have considered appropriate for me. She let that land for a moment. And I will particularly not accommodate this from people who, in my first year at the helm of this company, had an off-the-record conversation about my weight and whether it affected investor confidence. I never said anything about that conversation. I am saying something about this one. She stopped. The room was completely silent. Whitmore was looking at her with an expression that was carefully composed but contained, somewhere behind the composure, something that looked like relief. Fenn said, carefully, "No one is suggesting your personal choices are Walter." She said his name with the particular patience of someone setting down a heavy thing for the last time. "I know what's being suggested. You know what's being suggested. Everyone in this room knows what's being suggested. What I'm telling you is that I'm not going to participate in the suggestion anymore." She looked around the table. "The expansion contract closes in 3 weeks. Q1 projections are the strongest in company history. Our employee retention rate is the highest it's ever been. If any of you have concerns about those numbers, I am here to discuss them. If the concern is who I'm spending my evenings with, then we have a different kind of problem, and it isn't mine." She opened the folder in front of her and turned to the Q1 summary she'd had James print that morning, and she set it on the table. "I'd like to move to the quarterly numbers," she said. "Page 1. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Fenn said very little after that. Hargrove asked 2 questions about the Carson timeline that were genuine questions, operational, and Victoria answered them with specifics. Lim asked about the expansion's technical infrastructure. Park asked nothing, but nodded frequently, which Victoria interpreted as a man who'd decided which direction he was in. Whitmore asked the sharpest questions of anyone and received the sharpest answers, and by the end there was a different atmosphere in the room than the one it had started with. Not comfortable, not resolved, but shifted. When it broke up, Whitmore waited while the others filed out and then stopped beside Victoria's chair. "That was well done," she said quietly. "It needed to be said." It did, for a long time. Whitmore picked up her notebook. "Walter is not going to forget this. I know. He has the equity to make things difficult. I know that too." Whitmore looked at her for a moment. She had a way of looking at people that was both impersonal and kind, the quality of someone who had seen a lot of rooms and had long since stopped being impressed by any of them. "You have the numbers. Keep the numbers clean, and the argument disappears." She paused at the door. "And for what it's worth, what I've heard about the man you're seeing, not from the articles, from people who know people, he sounds like someone worth the trouble." She left before Victoria could respond. Victoria sat alone in the Harmon conference room for a few minutes after everyone had gone, looking out the north windows at the city, the river, the distant framework of the bridge project on the Morrison Overpass, which she could just barely make out from here if she looked carefully. She took out her phone and called Ryan. "How'd it go?" he asked. She could hear the site in the background. "I said what I needed to say." "Yeah? All of it?" "All of it." A pause. "Are you okay?" She thought about that. The room, Fenn's expression, Whitmore's quiet words at the door, the particular feeling of having said a true thing in a room full of people who'd been waiting for you to stay silent about it. "Yes," she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't meant it in weeks. "I think I am." What happened next, Victoria had not planned for. Dana called her at 4 that afternoon. James had already flagged it. Someone had been in the meeting. Not a leak exactly, but Patricia Whitmore had apparently shared something with a colleague that had found its way to a journalist who covered the tech sector and understood what it meant. By 6 o'clock, 2 outlets were running pieces about what had happened in the Harmon conference room. Not verbatim. Nobody had a recording. But the shape of it was accurate enough. Nexus CEO confronts board over personal life scrutiny, cites history of appearance-based bias. Victoria read the pieces in her car in the parking garage, same spot as before. She sat with them for a moment. Then her phone started buzzing. Not media. She'd turned those notifications off 2 weeks ago. These were personal. People she knew from inside the industry, former colleagues, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Short messages. Most of them said versions of the same thing. I've been in that room. Thank you for saying it. She drove home. At her apartment, she sat on her couch and read the messages slowly, one by one, the accumulation of them making something in her chest feel different than it had all week. There were women in those messages who had navigated the same invisible architecture for years and had said nothing because there was no moment that felt safe enough and no guarantee it would matter if they did. There were a few men who'd watched it happen and had their own discomfort about having stayed quiet. She was not naive enough to think the conversation was over. Fenn's 15% equity stake was a real thing, and Walter Fenn was a man who kept score across a long timeline. The backlash from the meeting, when it materialized, would come in indirect forms: procedural delays, strategic objections at inopportune moments, the particular bureaucratic friction that someone with his experience could generate without ever saying anything specific enough to contest. But the numbers were good. The Carson contract was 3 weeks out, and she had said what she'd needed to say in a room that had needed to hear it, and whatever came next, she had done it clean. Ryan came over that evening. He sat on her couch and listened to her walk through the whole meeting, not just the summary she'd given him on the phone, but the full version. Ben's opening, the silence when she mentioned overhearing the conversation, Whitmore at the door. He listened the way he always listened, with the particular qualities she'd noticed from the first night at Tavala, the kind of attention that made you feel like what you were saying was actually landing somewhere. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The part about the weight conversation," he said, "that happened in your first year." "Yes." "You've been carrying that for how long?" 5 years. He looked at her steadily. "Why didn't you say something then?" "Because I was 30 years old and I'd just gotten the company off the ground and I couldn't afford to be difficult." She said it without self-pity, just the plain mechanics of it. There's a tax that comes with being difficult when you're in a room full of people who didn't expect you to be there. You pay it in access and support and goodwill. I decided at the time that the cost was too high. She paused. "I made a different calculation today." "What changed?" She looked at him. It was a genuine question. He wasn't making a point. He actually wanted to know. "You told me I wasn't by myself," she said. "I think that changed what the calculation felt like." He didn't say anything for a moment. She watched something move through his expression. Not pride, something quieter. The specific look of a person who has understood that they mattered in a way they hadn't been sure of. "I also just got tired," she added. "That's true too." "Anger and exhaustion are underrated," he said. "They got me through that room." He reached over and pushed her hair back from her face, the casual intimacy of it, and she leaned into his hand slightly without meaning to, and then didn't pull back. "I'm proud of you," he said. She'd heard those words from other people, her parents, early investors, people who meant something generic by them. From Ryan, they landed differently. They meant, "I saw what that cost and I know you did it anyway." "Don't make me cry in my own apartment," she said. "Your apartment. Your rules." She made a sound that was half laugh and turned away from him slightly to get herself under control, and he let her do it without comment, which was exactly right. The following 2 weeks were not quiet, but they were navigable. The media coverage peaked and began to taper, the way coverage always did when the next story came along. What persisted was something different, a slower current of attention, the kind generated by people who had found something in the story that they wanted to hold on to. Her social media, which she managed minimally and mostly through Dana, had gained a significant following in 10 days. Messages came in from women who worked in industries where the same invisible math was applied to their personal lives, who had sat in their own versions of the Harmon conference room, who had done the same calculation about the cost of saying something versus the cost of staying quiet. She read them when she had time. She didn't respond to most of them because she didn't know how to respond in a way that was honest without being performative. What she felt reading them was complex. Gratitude that what she'd said had found people it needed to find, and something more uncomfortable that was about how many of them there were. How many rooms? How many years? Caleb Marsh stopped appearing in the coverage. Whether this was because the journalists had stopped finding him useful, or because someone had advised him that the strategy wasn't working, she didn't know and didn't spend energy trying to find out. He was a minor character in a story he'd briefly tried to make himself central to, and without her engagement, he had no leverage. She had always known that. The knowledge was cleaner now. The Carson Group contract closed on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the board meeting, with Ian Carson's signature on the final documents and a brief call during which he told Victoria that the Nexus team had been the most prepared and most honest partner he'd worked with in 15 years of enterprise deals. She thanked him and got off the phone and sat quietly for 30 seconds, and then told James to order lunch for the entire company floor because they were allowed one afternoon off from being professional about it. The celebration was low-key and genuine, the kind of office moment that happened in open-plan spaces when everyone who'd worked towards something realized it had actually landed. Victoria moved through it feeling the particular satisfaction of a job completed at the correct level of difficulty. Not easy, not impossible, but exactly hard enough to mean something. Walter Fenn sent an email at 5 o'clock. Congratulations on the Carson close. Strong work. 11 words. She read it and thought, this is his version of standing down. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement. Just the minimum possible recognition from a man who was revising his position without admitting he'd held a different one. She forwarded it to Dana with no comment. Dana responded, noted. Whitmore called personally that evening. The Carson close gives you significant leverage going into the next board cycle, she said. I want you to know I'll be recommending a governance review, the kind that looks at how board meetings get called and what for. Thank you, Patricia. Don't thank me. It's overdue. A brief pause. How are things otherwise? Victoria knew what she meant. Good, she said. Things are good. I'm glad to hear it. Another pause, the kind that contained something that Whitmore had decided to say. I was in a room like that once, 20 years ago. Different industry, different specific issue. I didn't say anything. Her voice was even, not regretful exactly, just reporting accurately. I've thought about it a fair number of times since. You did the thing I didn't do. Victoria held the phone for a moment. I had more to stand on than you did 20 years ago. Maybe, but it still cost something. Yes, Victoria said, it did. After she hung up, she sat at her desk for a while in the quiet of the emptying office. The city was going dark outside the windows. The bridge was lit up over the river Shem. She could see it from here. The Morrison overpass. The lights along its deck that Ryan had spent months making structurally sound. She thought about that for a moment. All the invisible work that went into the things that just looked like themselves from a distance. She picked up her phone. Carson closed. She texted Ryan. Come celebrate with me. His response came in 3 minutes. On my way. Ellie's at Dominic's. Bringing food. She smiled at her phone in the empty office. Set it down, started shutting down her computer. He brought Thai food again, from the same cart pod where she'd gotten sauce on her sleeve, which was either sentimentality or convenience, and she suspected it was both. They ate at her kitchen counter, and she told him about the Carson call, and he listened and asked the right questions, and when she was done, he said, You know what that contract is? A good deal. It's proof, he said. That every argument they tried to use against you this month was wrong on its own terms. The company didn't suffer. It performed. That's the answer to every piece of the argument. I know. Does it feel good? She thought about it honestly. It feels like relief more than good. Good will come later. Relief is fine. He reached for the last of the spring rolls. Relief is earned. They stayed at her place that night, and she slept better than she had in 3 weeks. The particular sleep that comes when a sustained tension has finally released. And when she woke up at 6, Ryan was already making coffee in her kitchen, wearing yesterday's clothes and clearly familiar enough with her cabinet layout to find everything without opening the wrong one. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him for a moment before he heard her. The thing about him, she thought, was that he was completely himself in any room he was in. Her apartment with its good light and river view didn't change how he moved through a space. The board members' opinions of him hadn't changed who he was. The magazine article with its class dynamic sidebar hadn't required him to explain or defend or adjust anything. He was simply, stubbornly, clearly himself, and he had been from the first night across a restaurant table, and it was the most underrated and most essential thing she had ever encountered in another person. "Coffee's almost ready," he said, hearing her. "I see that." He turned, looked at her for a moment. "You look better." "I feel better." "Good." He turned back to the coffee maker. "Ellie wants to know if you're coming Sunday. She's been testing a theory about birdhouse architecture that requires multiple opinions." "Multiple opinions or a specific audience?" "You and me." Dominic said no on the grounds that he already lost the last structural debate with an 8-year-old, and his professional credibility can't sustain another hit. Victoria came into the kitchen and sat on the counter stool. "Tell her I'll be there." Ryan slid a mug across the counter to her. She wrapped her hands around it. Outside the windows, the river was silver in the early morning light, and the bridge was just visible against the sky, and she looked at it for a moment. The thing he'd been building while all of this had been happening, solid and functional, and exactly what it was supposed to be. "Ryan," she said. He looked at her. "I know I've said this before, but I mean it more now." She kept her hands around the mug, looking at him steadily. "Thank you for not moving." He held her gaze. He understood what she meant. Not just the last month, not just the board meeting and the articles and the whole loud, difficult machinery of it. The first night, the empty chair, the simple act of crossing a restaurant toward someone when every other person in it had looked away. "I didn't go anywhere," he said. "I know." She looked down at her coffee. "That's the whole thing." He came around the counter and stood beside her, and she leaned her shoulder against his arm, and they drank their coffee in the morning quiet of her apartment, the river light moving on the ceiling, the city waking up outside, the bridge standing clean and solid over the water where he'd spent months making it sound. Whatever was still ahead, Fenn's long memory, the next board cycle, the noise that didn't fully stop because noise never did. She'd face it the same way she'd faced the Harmon conference room, having thought it through, having said the true thing, and knowing exactly who was standing beside her. That was enough. More than enough. It was, she thought, everything. Spring came to Portland the way it always did. Not with a clean break, but with a gradual negotiation. Cold mornings and warm afternoons, the cherry trees along the park blocks going pink for 2 weeks, and then dropping everything at once so the sidewalks looked like they'd been papered by hand. Ryan noticed it from job sites, the way he noticed most things about the city. At ground level, through work, through the particular quality of light on concrete at 7 in the morning when the temperature had climbed just enough to feel like something had shifted. The Morrison Overpass project finished in the second week of March. Final inspection passed on a Tuesday, and Marcus Teal shook Ryan's hand on the bridge deck with the wind off the river, doing what it always did, and Ryan stood there for a moment looking at what they'd built. Not with sentimentality, because he was not a sentimental man about his work, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who understood that a thing done correctly has its own kind of permanence. Cars would drive over this for decades. The work would outlast the knowing of it. He told Ellie that night, and she said, "Does the bridge feel better now?" "I think it does." "You fixed it." "We fixed it, whole crew." She nodded with the gravity of someone filing this away correctly. "But you were in charge of understanding the problem." Ryan looked at her across the kitchen table. "Yeah," he said. "I was." Ellie went back to her book. Ryan cleared the dishes and thought about the fact that this kid, at 8 years old, had a more accurate understanding of what his work actually was than most adults he'd tried to explain it to. Victoria called that evening to ask how the final inspection had gone, and he told her, and she said, "I can see it from my office window, you know," which he'd forgotten she'd mentioned once before, and he thought about that for a moment. The bridge, and her window, and the months that had happened in between the two. "Can you see it right now?" he asked. "I'm looking at it." "It's solid," he said. "It'll hold." A brief pause. "I know it will." They both let that sit for a second, understanding that they were talking about more than the bridge, the way people sometimes do when a sentence does double work without being asked to. The governance review that Patricia Whitmore had promised moved through the board's procedural machinery over March and April, slowly, but with the particular momentum of something that had enough support to be unstoppable even at low speed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no public reckoning. What it produced was a formal policy about the scope of board authority over executive personal conduct, specifically that there was none, outside of conflicts of interest that met a defined legal standard. The policy was dry and bureaucratic and said nothing explicitly about what had happened in the Harmon conference room, but everyone in the building understood what it was about. Walter Fenn voted for it. Victoria had expected him to abstain or to find a procedural reason to delay, but he voted for it with the expression of a man who had taken a long look at the numbers and decided that the most strategic position was graceful revision. He did not apologize. He did not reference what had happened. What he did, 6 weeks after the board meeting, was call Victoria and ask if she had time for coffee. And when they met, he talked about the company's direction with a focus and specificity that suggested he had decided to invest his energy in the things that were actually his business. It was not a resolution of the kind that happened in movies. He didn't admit he'd been wrong. He didn't say anything about Ryan or about the conversation Victoria had overheard. What he did was behave like a board member doing his job correctly. And after 2 years of managing the version of him that believed his equity stake included a share of her personal choices, Victoria found the transactional version of Walter Fenn an enormous relief. She told Ryan about the coffee meeting in the way she'd learned to tell him things, directly, without editing out the parts that were complicated. He didn't apologize, Ryan said. No. Does that bother you? Victoria thought about it honestly. Less than I expected. The apology I wanted from him was never going to be the real thing anyway. What I wanted was for it to stop, and it stopped. She paused. I'm not interested in his contrition. I'm interested in the company. Fair, Ryan said. Does it bother you? That there was no formal acknowledgement. He was quiet for a moment. A little, he said. But I'm not the one who had to sit across from him for 2 years. He called you a construction worker like it was a diagnosis. He wasn't the first. Ryan's voice was even. Won't be the last. It still wasn't acceptable. No, it wasn't. He shifted the phone. But if the outcome is that it stopped and the policy changed and you came out of it with the numbers you have, that's a better result than an apology that doesn't mean anything. She held on to that. It was the kind of reasoning she'd arrived at herself, but it was different hearing it from him because he was the one who'd been categorized, the one whose worth had been subject to other people's arithmetic, and his willingness to call the outcome sufficient was not resignation. It was the judgment of someone who understood the difference between what justice looked like in principle and what it was available to be in practice. Ellie turned 9 in April. The birthday party was at the apartment. 6 kids from her class, Dominic and Priya, Mrs. Okafor, and Victoria, who had been incorporated into the event planning as a consultant on account of what Ellie described as good aesthetic judgment, which meant she had opinions about the cake. The cake was chocolate with a bridge on it, which had been Ellie's request and which the bakery near Tavola had executed with more architectural accuracy than Ryan had expected. Victoria had gone with him to order it, and the woman at the counter had looked at the sketch Ellie had done of what she wanted and then looked at Ryan and said, "Is this your bridge?" And Ryan had said yes, and she'd said she could do it, and she did. The party was loud and imperfect and wonderful in the way of children's parties. Things spilled. One kid cried for a reason nobody fully identified. The game of musical chairs devolved into a general physical dispute that Dominic refereed with unconvincing authority, and Mrs. Okafor sat in the corner eating cake with the serenity of someone watching a nature documentary she'd seen many times before. Victoria sat on the floor in Ellie's room at one point, surrounded by 3 of Ellie's friends who had discovered that she worked in tech and had questions about video games, which she answered honestly. She didn't make games, but she knew people who did, and yes, it was possible to have a job doing that. And no, it was not as glamorous as it sounded, but yes, it was still pretty good. The 3 girls considered this information with the focused assessment of people doing genuine career research, and Victoria caught Ryan watching from the doorway with the expression he sometimes had when he thought she wasn't looking. The one that wasn't quite a smile, but was the thing underneath a smile. After the other kids had gone home and Ellie was winding down in the sugar crash zone, half asleep on the couch still holding a piece of her bridge cake, Victoria stood at the kitchen sink washing up while Ryan dried, the radio on low, the apartment quiet around them. "She had a good day," Victoria said. She did. The bridge cake was the right call. It was entirely your call. I said maybe a puppy. A puppy cake is fine at 6. At 9, she needed the bridge. Ryan put away a plate. You know her pretty well? Victoria turned the water off and reached for the dish towel. I've been paying attention. He took the towel from her and hung it on the oven handle and stood for a moment in the kitchen, and she could feel him deciding something. She knew his decision face. She'd come to know the specific quality of his silences, the ones that were processing versus the ones that were simply comfortable, and this one was the former. What? She said. Nothing. I'm glad you're here. In the kitchen? In general. He looked at her directly. You know what I mean. She did. She'd known for a while, the same way you know a season is changing before any single day proves it definitively, the accumulation of evidence that adds up to something you don't need to name to understand. But she held his gaze and said, Yeah, I do. Ellie made a sound from the couch that might have been a word or might have been sleep, and they both looked over, and she was gone, fully asleep, the piece of cake still in her slack hand, her face the specific piece of a child who'd had exactly the day they wanted. Ryan carefully extracted the cake piece and covered her with the blanket from the chair back and turned off the living room light, and Victoria watched him do all of this with the quiet competence of someone who had done it 10,000 times, who knew exactly how to move in this space without disturbing what mattered. She thought about her own apartment across the river, the organized, functional, good light apartment where she'd grown increasingly aware over the past months of what was missing, not things. The apartment had everything things could provide. What it lacked was what this one had, which was not square footage or location or the view of the river, but the particular accumulated texture of a life that contained more than one person's story. She stayed that night and many of the nights that followed, and after a while it was less a decision than a fact. Her things appearing in the apartment in the gradual way of someone who has stopped going home between visits because home has relocated without a formal announcement. Summer came. The city turned gold and dry, and the bridge was beautiful in the evening light. And Ryan started a new project on the east side, a commercial development with a structural complexity that he found genuinely interesting, which Ellie said meant the building had feelings too. And Victoria said she agreed with Ellie, and Ryan said both of them were wrong but looked like he didn't fully mean it. It was in June that the first reporter reached out directly to Victoria, asking for an interview about the board meeting and what had followed. She declined 3 previous requests from various outlets, but this one was from a journalist named Sophia Chen, who wrote long-form pieces for a publication Victoria respected, and the email was thoughtful in a way that suggested Chen had actually done the work of understanding what had happened before she asked. Victoria sat on it for a week. She talked to Ryan about it one evening. They were on his balcony, the summer version, the city doing its warm weather noise below, and she laid out the reasoning both ways. I could say nothing, she said. The story's mostly told itself by now. The policy changed, the company's performing. It's in the past enough that engaging with it again could reopen things that have closed. Or I say it clearly, on the record, in the form I want it in, not the version that got filtered through whatever Whitmore's colleague heard and passed on. The actual version, with my name on it. Ryan turned his beer glass in his hands. What do you want to say? I want to say that what happened to me in that boardroom happens in aversion to a lot of women in a lot of industries, and most of them never say anything because the cost-benefit doesn't work out, and I happened to be in a position where the numbers were strong enough and my standing was solid enough that the cost was survivable. She paused, and I want to say that I was able to do it because I wasn't doing it alone. He was quiet for a moment. That last part, you'd put that in? You'd be in the piece. I know. Is that okay? He looked at her. She watched him think through it with the same deliberate honesty he brought to everything. Not quick agreeing to make her feel good, actually considering it. She knew by now that his slowness on decisions was not hesitation. It was respect for the thing being decided. Yeah, he said. It's okay. Say what's true. It might get noisy again for a while. We've handled noisy. We have, she agreed. The interview ran in August. Sophia Chen had written it with the precision of someone who understood that the best way to honor a story was to get out of its way. Victoria's words were in it, clearly attributed, the full account of the board meeting and what preceded it and what had changed afterward. There was a paragraph about Ryan, not intrusive, not reductive, that described him in terms that were accurate and that he read on his phone one morning before a site visit and put back in his pocket without comment, which meant he was okay with it. The piece was shared more than anything Victoria had ever been associated with. The comments were everything from incendiary to genuinely moving, the full spectrum of public response to something that touched a nerve people had been living with for years. Dana Chu managed the media fallout with her usual efficiency and told Victoria 3 days after publication that the company's new inbound inquiries had doubled. People want to work for you, Dana said. They want to build things with someone who said what you said. Victoria took that in. Good, she said. We have room. The anniversary of the night at Tavola fell on a Friday in October. Ryan had been thinking about it for 2 months. Not obsessively. He had too many practical things demanding his attention for obsession, but with a quiet steadiness, the way he thought about load-bearing problems on a job site, turning the question of how and when and where until it had the right shape. He made a reservation at Tavola 3 weeks out. He didn't tell Victoria where they were going. He asked Dominic to take Ellie for the night, which Dominic agreed to with such immediate enthusiasm that Ryan suspected he already knew something, which meant Ellie had probably told him, which meant Ellie almost certainly knew what he was planning. He asked Ellie about it on a Thursday evening, the two of them at the kitchen table after homework. "Did you tell Dominic something?" he said. Ellie looked at her book. "What would I tell Dominic?" "Ellie." She looked up. Her expression was the one she'd inherited directly from him, the one that was trying to stay neutral and not quite managing it. "I found the box," she said. "It was in your sock drawer." "I had it in my sock drawer for 2 days." "I reorganized your sock drawer." "Why were you—" He stopped. "Never mind. What did you tell Dominic?" "That you were finally doing it." She said finally with the particular emphasis of someone who had been waiting with some impatience. "Because you've been making the face for like 2 months." "What face?" "The face where you're thinking about something important, but you're pretending you're not." She looked at him with frank assessment. "You have a lot of faces that you think are invisible but aren't." Ryan looked at his daughter for a moment. 9 years old. He thought about the hospital, the first night, this small creature that had arrived and remade everything he'd understood about what his life was for. He thought about all the years between then and now, the hard ones and the ordinary ones, and the ones that had been quietly extraordinary in ways he hadn't recognized until he was past them. "She's going to say yes," Ellie said, "just so you know." "You don't know that." "I know her," Ellie said simply. "She's going to say yes." She went back to her book. Ryan looked at the table for a moment. "You're okay with it?" he asked. "Actually okay." Ellie lowered the book again. She thought about it with the seriousness she brought to questions she understood were real. "She came to my chorus thing," she said. "She found me in the audience because of her coat. She brings books that are real books, not kid books. She argues with you about things." She paused. "She stays." That last word. Ryan held it. "Yeah," he said. "She does." "That's what matters," Ellie said, and went back to her book. He didn't tell Victoria about the restaurant until they were in the car. She dressed for dinner. She always dressed thoughtfully without overthinking it, which was one of the things he'd noticed from the first night. And she was in a dark jacket he recognized, and her hair was down, and she was looking at her phone when he pulled out of the parking garage and said, "We're going to Tavola." She looked up from her phone, looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "Ryan, it's been a year." She was quiet. He could feel her working through the specific weight of it, what that restaurant was, what it held, what had happened at a table near the back on a rainy Friday in October 12 months ago. "I haven't been back," she said. "I know. I've thought about going back. I never did." "Then it's time." She turned to look out the window. He let her be quiet about it. After a moment, she said, "I'm not going to fall apart." "I know you're not. I just want to say that up front." Noted. She made a small sound that was something between a laugh and an exhale. He drove. "Paz, Tavalla was the same as it always was. The amber light, the exposed brick, the tables pushed close together, the chalkboard menu by the bar. The same warmth of a room that wasn't trying to impress anyone and had been doing its job correctly for years. The host led them to a table near the back. Ryan had not requested the specific table. He'd let it be wherever it was. It was 2 tables away from where Victoria had been sitting a year ago. Close enough. They ordered. They talked the way they always talked, easily and without performance, the conversation going wherever it went, which tonight included the new East Side project and a book Ellie was reading that had sparked a 4-day interest in the geologic formation of the Pacific Northwest, and a story Victoria had about a junior developer at Nexus who had quietly fixed a critical bug without telling anyone, and she'd found out about it accidentally and had given him a raise that had made him go pale in the meeting. He didn't know if he was in trouble, she said. Were you going to fire him for fixing a bug? He didn't know that. He'd been there 6 months. He was terrified. What did you say to him? I told him that the next time he identified a critical problem, I needed him to tell me about it because I needed to know where my vulnerabilities were. And then I told him what the raise was and watched him have to decide whether to cry in my office. Did he? He held it together until he was in the hallway. She picked up her wine glass. James told me later. Ryan smiled. He looked at her across the table. The same table and candlelight dynamic as the first night. The same restaurant, different year, different shape of everything. He thought about the man who had sat down and stood back up in 90 seconds and walked out. He thought about the specific moment he'd pushed back his chair and picked up his drink and walked over, and how it had not felt like a decision so much as a simple correction. Something was wrong, and he had the ability to do something small about it, so he did. He had not known, walking across that room, that he was walking toward the person who would matter most to him outside of his daughter. He had not known anything about Nexus Solutions or $400 million valuations or board meetings or magazine articles or any of the noise that had followed. He'd known a woman was sitting alone after being treated badly and the chair across from her was empty. That was all it had been. The whole enormous thing had started with that. He reached into his jacket pocket. Victoria was saying something about the junior developer, a follow-up detail she'd remembered, and she stopped mid-sentence when she saw him pull out the small box, because she understood immediately what it was, and she put her wine glass down. The restaurant continued around them, the birthday table by the window, the couple in their 60s eating in their comfortable silence, the ambient noise of a Friday evening in a room full of ordinary people having their ordinary lives. Ryan opened the box and looked at her across the table. I had a speech, he said. I've been working on it for 2 months. Okay, she said. Her voice was very steady. Her eyes were not. I lost it about 30 seconds ago. She made a sound. Ryan, the best version of what I want to say is this. He held the box open on the table between them. You were sitting at a table in this restaurant a year ago, and someone decided you weren't worth staying for. I want to spend the rest of my life being the opposite of that decision. He paused. I want to stay. For all of it. The board meetings and the bad weeks and the pasta in the kitchen, and Ellie's theories about bridge feelings and whatever comes after all of that. He looked at her directly. I'm asking you to let me. Victoria looked at the ring, looked at him. She took a breath that wasn't quite steady, and he saw everything move through her face. The careful composure and the thing underneath it, and the thing underneath that, the part that had been kept in storage and brought out rarely and had been used more in this last year than in everything that came before. The man who sat down at that table and left before he ordered dinner, she said slowly, made the worst decision of his life. That's what I told Ellie. Her face changed completely. You told Ellie? She found the ring in my sock drawer. She reorganized my sock drawer. Victoria pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Her eyes were bright. She told you I'd say yes. She did. She was right. Victoria took her hand away from her mouth and looked at him with all of it fully visible. The sharp intelligence and the warmth she didn't give away easily, and the specific kind of toughness that came from being underestimated. So many times you stopped caring about the estimation. The whole person, uncurated, across a restaurant table. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. He put the ring on her finger and she looked at it for a moment, and then looked at him, and the restaurant continued its ordinary Friday evening around them, unaware, the way the world always was, about the things that mattered most. They married in May of the following year, outside at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. Small, 40 people, which had required some effort because Victoria knew more people who wanted to be there, and Ryan had a crew that considered themselves family, and there had been genuine negotiation about the list. They'd settled on 40 as the number that contained everyone essential without becoming a production, and it was the right number. Dominic was Ryan's best man. Priya was one of Victoria's 2 people at the front. Patricia Whitmore came, which Victoria had not asked for, but had been quietly glad of. Ellie was the flower girl. She wore a yellow dress that she had opinions about. Specifically that yellow was correct, and anything else would have been wrong. And she walked the aisle with the focused gravity of someone executing an important task, and then stood beside Victoria for the ceremony, and held her hand at one point without looking at her, a quiet lateral reach, and Victoria held on without looking back at her, and neither of them made anything of it. Ryan noticed. He noticed everything that day with the particular clarity of a person who understands they are inside a moment they will carry forward for the rest of their life. The light in the vineyard. Victoria, in the dress she'd chosen because it was right, and not because it was supposed to be anything, the dark of it against the green of the hills. Ellie beside her with her focused gravity and her yellow dress. Dominic to his right, smelling inexplicably of cedar and trying not to look emotional and failing. The officiant asked the question, and Ryan said yes, and Victoria said yes. And Ellie made a sound of profound satisfaction that several people in the front row heard, which broke the solemnity briefly in the best possible way. They drove back from the vineyard that evening through the Willamette Valley, with Ellie asleep in the back seat, her yellow dress creased, her shoes off, fully gone the way she went after events she'd invested herself in completely. Victoria had her window down slightly, and the evening air came through, late May and soft, and the valley was still gold-green in the last light. Ryan drove. Victoria had her hand on the center console, and he had his over hers, the way he'd reached across the Tavola table in the first weeks. The gesture that had never meant anything theatrical. Just, I'm here, in the same place you are. Are you happy? He asked. Not rhetorically. Actually asking. She thought about it honestly, the way she always did. Yes, she said. The real kind. What's the real kind? She looked out the window at the valley. The kind that doesn't need anything to be different, she paused. Not perfect, just this. The actual this. He understood. He'd known the other version, the kind that was always one condition away from being complete, one variable short of landing. He'd lived inside that version for years and done his best with it. What he had now was the thing she was describing, the actual this, imperfect and specific and real. Ellie told me something last week, he said. What? She said she has 2 people now who stay. Victoria was quiet. She said it just like that, Ryan continued, like it was a fact she was logging. 2 people who stay. He felt rather than saw Victoria look over at him. She's right, Victoria said quietly. She usually is. In the back seat, Ellie made a small sound and shifted and settled back under. The road ran through the valley and the light was going, and the sky was doing the thing it did in the Pacific Northwest in late May, all those shades of gold and gray that the rest of the country didn't have words for. Ryan thought about the bridge. About the morning he had stood on the finished deck with Marcus and felt the satisfaction of a thing done correctly, the knowledge that it would hold long after the people who built it were gone. He thought about his kitchen with the cabinet hinge he'd finally fixed in February. He thought about the drawing on Ellie's wall, the stick figure and the bridge with its ambiguous face, the question of what the bridge was feeling left deliberately open. He thought it probably felt something like this, solid, tested, still standing. Some things you build over time, piece by piece, without knowing what they're going to become. You show up and you do the work and you stay when it's hard, and eventually you step back and look at what you've made, and it's something you couldn't have designed from the beginning because you didn't know yet what it needed to be. That was the thing nobody told you, Ryan thought. The best structures aren't the ones you planned perfectly. They're the ones you built honestly, with the right people beside you, over enough time to get them right. He drove. Victoria was quiet beside him. Ellie slept in the back. The valley fell away behind them, and the lights of Portland appeared in the distance ahead, the city they'd both found separately and stayed in for different reasons, and that had, on a rainy Friday in October, put them in the same room at the right moment. The rest had been their own work. All the things worth having are.